As the commentary and the history shows us, Michael is from a village. By our standards today, Michael was a country boy. His village would have been considered to be in the middle of nowhere in an agricultural area with no major cities near it. The book of Micah, the sixth book of 12 prophets, was written by the prophet Micah in the 8th century. Composed of 7 chapters, the book is similar in many ways to Amos. Michael attacked the corruption of those in high places and social injustice. The book is also divided into 2 sections. The first section is judgments against Judah and Jerusalem. The second promises of restorations for promises for restoration and for judges against other nations. In the first section, Micah speaks to us of praise for the corruption that is taking place taking the place of religious and political leaders in Florida and our nation's capital. I'm sorry, my note says takes place. I stand corrected. My note says corrupt leaders of Israel and Judea. That was a joke, y'all. Come on, listen up a little bit. Come on. Micah takes it upon himself to attack and admonish the prophets who had made their business to sell false hopes and dreams. From the scripture and from the commentary, we find that Micah was not your "you have my thoughts and prayers" kind of guy. Micah was not a get along prophet. He was not that kind of guy. Micah was a prophet you love to hate. Micah was an in-your-face kind of prophet when it came to the corruption and injustice that was witnessed. I could hear the people of the church now, and not this church, but some other churches, that Michael runs his mouth too much. Michael talks too much. Michael's always got his mouth, his finger in somebody else's business. Michael just always talks too much. And if you will allow me for just a few moments to use my theological imagination, if he were alive today, Michael would share with us the stories of how he and Susan B. Anthony fought for women's rights and social equality and the abolishment of slavery. If Michael were alive today, he would share with us how he and Gloria Steinem ushered in the second wave of feminism. Michael could have been there or nearby the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on that dreadful day in April 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. I would not be surprised if we looked around as the crowds gathered as a protest in the killings of young Trayvon Martin and Mr. George Floyd, Ms. Breonna Taylor, Ms. Sandra Blair, and Mr. Michael Brown. If we looked around the crowds, I think Micah would have been there. Mm-hmm. Micah was, wherever there was injustice, there was Micah. Micah 6 and 8, this has long been one of my ways to go to the scripture in trying times. Today, during these trying times, it is one of the most quoted and shared scriptures, more so by those of us who hope for a better America and for a better tomorrow. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Our nation finds itself in constant turmoil, wrestling with unrest, insurrections, and racial tensions, and homelessness, and mental illness, and substance abuse, gun violence, mass shootings, attacks on those who live alternative lifestyles, unfair sentencing, and tell me where in our nation can we find affordable housing? With the realities of systematic racism and systematic poverty, we need a little more than thoughts and prayers. Prayer is relational. Prayer allows us to go deeper into and closer to God. Prayer serves as a thank you to God. However, prayer does not relieve you and I of our duties as Christians. Mm-hmm. Prayer does not take us out of the world of hate, war, and a world of hunger. I believe prayer is an action that should lead us to the service into reflection back to God. I'm paraphrasing here, but in John, Jesus said, It was Jesus the Master who said, don't look at me for an answer. You're on your own. I'm paraphrasing y'all. If you want advice, this is the last thing I'm going to give you. You work things out amongst yourselves. Don't look at me. I'm not the boss. I'm simply one who will soon be dead and gone. When we find ourselves in travail and solidarity, solidarity must replace our thoughts and prayers regarding, as it relates to religion, freedom, human rights, judicial restraints, and congressional ethics and criminal justice reform. We're too quick to confuse justice with revenge. We usually think of justice as being a punishment for breaking the law. All lives matter. However, we need to understand the suffering of groups if we want to heal understand the suffering of all groups if we want to heal our world. I am bewildered by Christians who have no problems acknowledging that we live in a world that is broken and filled with faults and problems, and do nothing to erase the cancers in our judicial systems, our criminal justice systems, education, political, and in the church. We're Christians, y'all. God is simply asking us to care for each other, to look after each other, to be accountable to humankind. To walk is equivalent to carrying on a course of daily activity. So the expression walk in the name means to live and act accordingly to and with reference to and in reliance on the character of God. That's what Michael's referring to. In Hebrews, we find the word hesed, which is translated as mercy or kindness. It also involves action. It is love displayed actively towards each other. In Genesis 1:27, we find these words in the beginning. God created woman, and I'm adding man and woman, in God's own image. In the darkest moments of history, both then and still today, God always gives hope. The hope of people fails God again and again, just as many of us fail. Yet the story never ends there. Our miracle-working, life-transforming God desires to change our hearts and lives to be a living representation of Him. Light in a world that desperately needs God's love and peace. This verse, Micah 6:8, shows us what God's requiring. Besides this, God doesn't require anything from us. It's very simple. But this verse encompasses a great deal. The desire that God's children should be like God. Same mind, same thoughts, same life, and the same godly sorrow over unrighteousness in our hearts, the same honesty and straightforwardness when it comes to both themselves and when it comes to others. As I prepare to take my seat, Walter Brigham, an Old Testament scholar and theologian, has this to say: if there is to be shalom, it will not be for just the isolated or the insulated individuals. It is rather security and prosperity granted to the whole community, young and old, rich and poor, powerful and dependent. Together we stand before God's blessings, and together we receive the gift of life. If we receive it all, shalom comes, only to the inclusive, embracing community that excludes none.